righty. That is the subject of my keynote today. Start that conversation. Every year in the United States, 8 million people contemplate suicide. 1 million people attempt it. 39,000 in their lives. 39,000. That's twice the rate of homicide. As a matter of fact, more people in the United States die from self-harm every year than homicide, natural disasters, and war combined. 39,000 is a little difficult to wrap your mind around. That's Riverfront Stadium in Cincinnati. It holds 39,000 people. This week was the 16th anniversary of 9/11. And on that horrible day in September, 3,987 people lost their lives. Every year in the United States, every year, 10 times that many die by suicide. And hardly anybody's talking about it. Some of my comedy work is on cruise ships. I do 12 weeks a year, 13 weeks a year on Holland America. It's breakfast. The place is packed. The Lido is full. I can't find a seat. And I see a woman at a table for two. There's an empty chair. I point, she nods, I sit. She looks up and she goes, "Hey, are you the comedian?" I said, "Hey, did you enjoy the comedy show?" She said, "I did very much." I said, "Then I'm the comedian." She's laughing. She goes, "What would you have said if I told you I didn't like the comedy show?" "I'm a plumber from Des Moines." She said to me, and this happens all the time, she goes, "Is cruise comedy all you do?" I said, "No, as a matter of fact, I'm a public speaker. And I just got booked to do a TED Talk." She goes, "I love the TED Talks. What's the topic?" Okay. I've been down this road many times before. So I said to her, "Depression and suicide." And then I started to count down in my head. 3, 2, 1. She says, "You know, I tried to kill myself twice. We've just met." She said the first time was in, wait for it, college. She said the second time far more serious. I'd graduated college, I'd graduated medical school. I had the knowledge, I had the equipment, I had the IV started into my ankle. I had the suicide cocktail in one hand, the syringe in the other, getting ready to load it up, and the phone rings. She said I was debating whether or not to answer it. She decided she would answer it because she said she was worried it might be somebody who would be worried would come over and interrupt. Picks up the phone, it's her 13-year-old son. She goes, "I don't know if he had a premonition or he heard something in my voice, but he said, 'Mom, don't do anything.'" So she said, "I didn't. I didn't give up on the idea of suicide, but I decided not to do it that day because I was afraid that he would realize he had spoken to me right before it happened and would always feel guilty, wondering whether there wasn't something he could have said or done to save my life." I said to her, "How old is he now?" She said, "He's 21. I said, "Does he know his phone call saved your life?" She goes, "No." How do you start that conversation? So that became the premise of my TED Talk. Last year, my car broke down. I had 3 thoughts unbidden. 1, I could get it fixed. 2, I could buy a new one. 3, or I could just kill myself. I know, every neuronormal person in this room is going, "What?" But there may be somebody in this room who realized, "Oh my Lord, that's the way I think." I did a college show in February, 800 college students. A young woman came up to me afterwards. She goes, "Your keynote made me weep." I said, "How did it make you weep?" She said, "When you said, my car broke down and I had 3 thoughts. I could get it fixed, I could buy a new one, or I could just kill myself." She goes, "I've been having those thoughts ever since I can remember, and I thought I was the only person in the world who thought that way." And she said, "When I heard you say that, I realized I was not alone." And I wept. That's the benefit of starting the conversation. The second thing you need to find is a vacuum, and we've spoken of it already. It's that not nearly enough people are discussing this epidemic. And I'll give you an example. When I was researching for my TED Talk, I went to the big TED.com, the mothership site. Have you been to TED.com? There are tens of thousands of talks on thousands of subjects. So I put suicide in the search box. 3 talks. 3 on suicide. Well, then it hit me. Well, I mean, let's face it. If you're really good at suicide, you're not going to be recording a TED Talk. An indication that not nearly enough people are talking about it. Depression and suicide run in my family. That's my grandmother Dixie, my mother Dixie in her lap, my Uncle Frank, my Aunt Christine. This is the eve of the Depression. My grandmother's just been widowed. She now has to get herself and these 3 children through the Depression. And she did it. She saw them through the Depression. She saw them through college. She saw all of them get married. And her job done, she ended her life. My mother found her. My mother tried to reach her by phone, couldn't get her on the phone, got worried, drove over, came up to the house. Anybody old enough to remember the milkman? They used to deliver bottles of milk to your house. She noticed that the milk was spoiling on the stoop, on the front porch, which it turns out was the only detail my grandmother overlooked. She had written checks for all the bills, addressed the envelopes, stamped them, put them on the kitchen counter. She pinned her will to her housecoat so my mother could find it. She turned on the gas on the old gas stove, blew out the pilot light. She sat down at the kitchen table and she wrote this note.
My dear children, I am so sorry to leave you, but it can't be helped. All summer long I have been going downhill. Doctors have done all they could, but in spite of them, my nerves have gone completely shot. I can't sleep, I can't eat, and my mind is sadly unbalanced. Under such conditions, life is absolutely unlivable. Be good, and meet me in the glory land. Heavenly Father understands. He has forgiven me, and I know you will too. Always my best love. Mother.
My great aunt, my mother's sister, ended her life by suicide. My mother and I found her. I was 4 years old. I'll spare you the details, but if you go to my TED Talk, go to franktedtalk.com, the story of my mother and me discovering my great aunt had had died by suicide is there. And I myself battle depression and thoughts of suicide. Last year I got a chance, or the year before, to audition for a show called Leverage here in Portland. And they wanted a hired killer. That was the character, a hired killer. Look at me. Does this scream hired killer? So what I decided to do was the only way that I could get the gig, the job, was to put the gray t-shirt on. I got some sort of badass military sunglasses. And I decided I would go to that audition. From the time I left my car till the time I got back in my car, I would let that part of my personality shine through at the audition, just to see what happened. By the time I got back to the car, my phone was ringing. It's my agent. I said, "Did I get the job?" He goes, No, you didn't get the job. And you can't go back in that building. I said, "Why can't I go back in the building?" Because I don't know what you did, but you scared them so bad, they said, "Never send him back." So apparently I let that part of my personality shine through. And that is a killer. This part of my personality has been trying to kill me for as long as I can remember. Came awfully close in 2010 in April. That's my Ruger nickel-plated .38. My wife and I were living in Centralia, Washington. Had a lovely farm. The recession, my business dropped off 80% overnight. We lost everything we'd been working for 25 years in a Chapter 7 bankruptcy. And I had an itch on the roof of my mouth I could only scratch with the front sight on that nickel-plated .38. I recorded the TED Talk, a rehearsal version, sent it to a friend of mine, Glenn Friesman, in Philadelphia. Glenn's from Philadelphia. He's blunt as a ball-peen hammer. I knew he would tell me exactly what he thought of the TED Talk. So I emailed it off. About an hour later, phone rings. Hello. Hey, it's Glenn. Glenn, what do you think of my TED Talk? He goes, "It's great. I just have a couple of questions." I said, "Okay." He goes, "April 2010, itch on the roof of your mouth, only scratched with that nickel-plated .38. Why didn't you pull the trigger?" I said, "Could you try to sound a little less disappointed?" I said, "I'll tell you why. It was my lovely wife, Wendy. I had $1 million in life insurance. $1 million. The problem was I did not know how long I'd had that policy. And every life insurance policy has a 2-year suicide clause. If you die by suicide in the first 2 years, it doesn't pay. After 2 years, it pays in full. And there's a misconception that when you are contemplating suicide, that your rational mind has gone someplace else. Even though this guy was trying to kill me, the rational part of my brain refused to let me do that and leave my wife not only heartbroken, but destitute. So I called my insurance agent, Graham Benson, a kind, caring, and it turns out very perceptive gentleman. And we're chit-chatting away. He knows about my financial problems. He's got an inkling about my mental issues. And in an offhanded way, I said, hey, Graham, just out of curiosity, how long have I had that policy? He goes, I don't know, I'll check. I can hear him clack, clack, clack on the keys. And he goes, oh, it's 22 months? And no, don't do it. He realized in that moment, I wasn't just calling to find out how long I'd had that policy. I was calling to get permission to end my life. And Glenn's second question was, does Graham Benson know that his phone call saved your life? And I said, as soon as the TED Talk posts on YouTube, I will send him a link and I will give him a call and we will start that conversation. And I did. And when Graham and I were talking, he said, Frank, when I hung up that day, I told my wife, I believe Frank King is going to end his life. He said, when I realized what you were asking, I did not know what to say. He said, but I knew I had to say something. So I just prayed when I opened my mouth that whatever fell out would be the appropriate response. And in fact, it was. And you don't always have to say the right thing, but say something. Somebody asked me the other day if I could give somebody advice who was suicidal, what should be the first thing they do? I said, call the Suicide Prevention Lifeline. And I said, secondly, call somebody else who's battling a mental illness, because we speak the same language. The problem with people who are neuronormal or normies in the mental illness nomenclature, they want to help, but they just have no concept of how bad. There's a story I heard about there's a guy who had fallen down a well and he was trapped. And his friends and family came by and they would look down. Oh man, that's awful. Gosh, I wish there was something I could do for you. Walk on. Family member comes by, same story. Wish there was something I could do for you. Friends come by. Wish there was something I could do for you. Finally, a stranger comes by. And this is the power of peer counseling, something that the Columbia River mental health folks offer. The stranger looks down, goes, oh, okay. Goes over the lip, crawls down as far as he can, then drops to the bottom. And the guy at the bottom of the well goes, what are you doing? He goes, I'm here to help you. He goes, but you're trapped in the well. He goes, yes, but I've been here before, and I know the way out. That's the power of peer counseling. When something triggers my depression, and there are triggers, it feels like somebody's turning up the force of gravity, slowly but surely. My cycle usually lasts 3 days. I can feel myself going down the first day, bottom out the second. I can feel gravity being turned back off the third. There are days in my life when my only goal in life is to get out of bed, put on these lead shoes, put one foot in front of the other until I can crawl back into bed. One morning like that, I actually turned to the bed and said to the bed, I'll be right back. Because there's a rock and roll song, a line in a rock and roll song, I don't even know which song it is, but the line goes like this: sleep is the only freedom she knows. And that's how it is for a lot of people who battle depression.